Hello, 718. So this video is going to walk us through the techniques that you'll be using to write your paper. These techniques are methods because, as we know, description and non-generalizable data requires that the researcher bring the data to the reader so that the reader can essentially be there in the field. That's our value proposition, not pontificating about what we saw when we were out there, but actually bringing what was out there to the page. And since we are talking about writing as a method, remember that the method itself is not something that is just a first draft. It takes a long time to get it right, to get yourself out of the way of the data. So if you're having concerns about how much time you're spending writing these small details, that's actually exactly what you're supposed to be doing. All right, so let's just go over the guidelines quickly for paper 2. This paper will evolve, refine, and revise the emergent theme from paper 1, and you'll incorporate more analytic insights gained through the triangulation of the interviewed data. It follows the same structure of the first paper, but will demonstrate an advanced understanding of the theme. So you can review paper 1 guidelines if you need to, but we're essentially just adding data, which gives you more options for thick description to demonstrate the theme that you've been digging through the data defined. All right, so in order, this is how I've asked you to write your paper. Express the theme, so a word that describes the emergent finding. Then offer a thick description of the theme. That means that you're actually giving the reader the experience of having been there or heard that in the data, allowing them to see it themselves so that they can then agree or disagree with your interpretation. Corroborate the theme. So once we have one Instagram photo or image described, we offer a few other examples that corroborate that this was not just one picture we were describing. Then a close analysis of that theme, which means explaining, walking your reader through each detail of what you just described and how that leads you to understand the theme. Here, this is going to taste like chicken. Chicken is the theme. Then you provide your thick description so that the reader can taste the data, so to speak. Then you offer some other options of data that taste similar to the first thick description. Tastes like chicken. Then, instead of leaving it there, you're going to actually walk your reader back through each detail. So while they're chewing and they can see and feel this theme, you're going to point out how it tastes like chicken. And then at the end, your implication is to identify an option or options for future research based on the theme. So that's your burden for the paper. Let's look at Borchardt, From Poverty to a Lifestyle, and see how he used those same 5 techniques as the backbone of his qualitative study. So this was the Journal of Contemporary Ethnography. The paper was Between Poverty and a Lifestyle. So I'm going to walk you through some of the research design so you can see how simple things are and how the data becomes the actual research, not the researcher's analysis or pontification. So, in terms of research design, Borchardt starts us off with the literature review, which is that in The actual review, he'll go into more detail, but the beginning of the paper simply says homeless people have been portrayed as choosing homelessness as a lifestyle. That's all the literature boils down to that. And from that literature, therefore, one can infer that a homeless person deserves to be homeless. And essentially, they have chosen that lifestyle. And we also find out right away from the writer that the goal of this study is to achieve a more complex understanding of contemporary homelessness. And we will also learn in the study that that's the research gap. There's a dearth of research that thickly describes the choices homeless people make. So if the prior literature says that they make the choice to be homeless, Borchardt has said, well, that's interesting because there's very little research that ever focuses on their choices, their everyday choices in the real world. So, observations of their leisure activities and free time, that's what he's going to look at. What do the leisure activities of homeless people look like? Again, a very simple idea. If the research says this, how come we don't have more studies like that? So I'm just going to go out there and see what it looks like. So again, as we continue to read, we'll follow this research question, this descriptive question. It's not causal. What do the leisure activities of homeless people look like? And if we move into the data, I've just extracted some excerpts of the data for us to look at, the thick description. And we see small details that will thickly describe the findings at some point. So we're just seeing, okay, well, there were only 2 African-American men at the patio. They didn't have any cups. They were using a laptop computer. And later, Borchardt will say that one of the other participants confirmed that they used technology and entertained themselves in various ways. Again, we're looking at the leisure activities. So from the details of the data, we should be able to start to infer, to taste, so to speak, what the themes that are going to synthesize all this data are. And qualitative researchers don't try to hide anything. Basically, the themes are, as we've said before, the headers, the boldface, the expression of the theme, distractions while trying to get ahead. And then we read the data, and I'm going to skip around a bit. I was walking, that itself was on the Fremont Street experience. I noticed that they were the only 2 African-American men on the patio, that they didn't have any cups with the Starbucks label, and that they were using a laptop computer. Distractions while trying to get ahead. Using the laptop computer. Does that sound like the potential beginning of a distraction? We have to read more of the thick description in this case, but your job is to make sure that your thick description matches the expression of the theme that's in the header above it. In this case, Borchardt, with many, many pages of thick description, offers us what are 4 overlapping themes that we now know are not just the activities that Jesse did. Drinking in the park with friends, or with friends in the park, was something that was thematic across the different participants that are chosen to represent all the participants that he interviewed. So, if we are now going to revisit the purpose of this study, we go back to this research-based inference, which was homeless people choose and deserve homelessness. And we asked, do homeless people choose homelessness as a lifestyle? Now, again, this is the peer-reviewed literature that the qualitative researcher is questioning. And based on the data, at least in this particular study, this is what was found. Participants made decisions about how to spend their free time. And those decisions are the distractions while trying to get ahead that were found in the theme. But interestingly, Borchardt chooses the word decisions instead of choices to describe what he witnessed his participants doing. And then he also acknowledges that other elements beyond their choosing were at work. 4 or 5 homeless people I focus on in the article from racial and minority groups, while the one Caucasian man could not legally work in the United States. And understanding that, now it makes more sense why the idea of them being African American, not having any cups, which infers that they didn't have the money to choose to buy Starbucks. Again, these are inferences here, but the data is suggesting, and the researchers' inclusion of these data suggests that these things are instrumental in the presentation of data to answer the research question. So again, the researchers' finding is simply that, yes, the participants made decisions about how to spend their free time, but in context, those lifestyles were shaped by social inequalities, not personal choice. So everyday decisions weren't about, I decide, hey, let's be homeless again for another day. Decisions were made in the context of distracting oneself from the lifestyle they had been given based on and shaped by social inequalities. Again, it's a subtle difference, but it's incredibly important in terms of how we think about what these non-generalizable data suggest. And the implication is simply that future research to theorize how life opportunities are mediated by social inequalities is necessary. That peer review literature doesn't or didn't exist in 2010 when this was published. So again, blood from your forehead